Going live. Okay, I'm back. This is Wind in the Willows by Kenneth Grahame. Again, I do not own any rights to the stories that I'm reading. Part of chapter 9 of The Wind in the Willows, okay? Wanderers all. Okay, sorry, this is Pearl Ann, in case you're new. I'm continuing with the rest of the book. Hopefully we'll get this done in 30 minutes, maybe? Okay, let's see. I'm sorry, Scrappy. This is my dog. One of my dogs. Chapter 9, Wanderers All. The water rat was restless, and he did not exactly know why. There was a feeling in the air of change and departure. Leaving the waterside, Rat wandered toward the country. He crossed a few meadows and pastures and thrust into a field of ripened wheat. Here, Rat had many friends who were always up for gossip. Today, however, the field mice and harvest mice seemed busy. Many were digging and tunneling. Some were hauling out dusty suitcases. Others were packing their belongings, while everywhere piles are bundled and ready to be moved. Hopefully you guys can hear me. I apologize for my computer making sounds. I need a new battery. Oh, here's a picture. You know it isn't time to be thinking of winter quarters yet, said the water rat sternly. Oh yes, we know that, explained the field mouse, but we really must get all the furniture moved out of this field before those hard harvesting machines begin clicking round the wheat. We're only just making a start. Oh, bother starts, said the rat. It's a splendid day. Come for a row on the river or a stroll along the hedges or a picnic in the woods or something. Well, I think, hurriedly, perhaps some other day, when we've more time. Yes, perhaps some other day when we've more time. The snort swung and round to go and returned somewhat grumpily to his river again. In the willows that lined the riverbank, he overheard several swallows talking together about their upcoming travels to the south. What's the hurry? Hey, what's the hurry? Asked the rat. Oh, we're not off yet, replied the first swallow. We're only making plans and arranging things, talking it over, what route we're taking this year, where we'll stop, and so on. That's half the fun. Fun? Asked the rat. I don't know what's fun about leaving your home. No, you don't understand, said the second swallow. It's natural for us. First we feel it stirring within us, a sweet unrest. We hunger to talk with each other, to compare notes. It's exciting, this anticipation. Couldn't you stay on for just this year? Suggested the water rat. I hate to see everyone go. It gets so lonesome. I tried that once, said the third swallow, but then the cold disappeared. I was forced to leave. I shall never forget the blissful feeling after I arrived of the hot southern sun again on my back and the taste of my first fat insect. Never again will I not go south, said I. Ah, yes, the call of the south, twittered the other two dreamily. Its songs, its hues, its radiant air. Oh, you remember. But there's also the call to come back, the first swallow interrupted. In due season, the song of lush meadow grass, wet orchards, warm insect-haunted ponds, of browsing cattle, of haymaking, and all the farm buildings clustering round the house of the perfect eaves. The rat wandered off once more, feeling restless. He traveled down the dusty lane until he came to a shady spot. There he lay in the underbrush and dreamed about the past and how it must lead to wondrous worlds, places other animals had gone, but never him. He heard footsteps and a figure came into view. Okay. He saw that it was a rat, and a very dusty one, who looked weary. The traveler, with a pleasant smile, turned from the road and sat down by Rat's side under the cool vines and tangles. He was thin, with small, sharp features. His paws were slender and long. His eyes were wrinkled at the corners. He wore small gold earrings in his neatly shaped ears. He wore a faded blue knitted sweater, and his pants were patched and stained. All he carried was a bundle of things tied up in a blue cotton handkerchief. "This is a beautiful place," the stranger remarked. "It is a goodly life that you lead, friend, no doubt the best in the world." "Yes, it is the only life to live," responded the water rat. "I did not say exactly," the stranger, "but no doubt it's the best. I've tried it. And even though I've tried it, 6 months of it, I'm leaving it to go south, back to the old life, which will not let me go." "You are not one of us," said the water rat. "You're not a farmer, nor even of this country." "Right," replied the stranger. "I'm a seafaring rat. I was born in the ports of Constantinople, though I'm a sort of stranger there too. In a way, my family, all seafaring rats, is from there." Sorry. "As for me, my home is in any pleasant coastal city between here and there. I know them all, and they know me. Set me down on any of their docks or beaches, and I'm home again." "Well, perhaps you have chosen the better way," said the water rat. "Tell me something of your sea travels, then, if you don't mind. What sort of memories do you bring home to warm your days by the fireside? To tell the truth, I was thinking today that my life is somewhat boring. I'm starting to hate it. Everyone else is leaving. I should be leaving too." The sea rat began to tell the water rat amazing stories of real but strange places. The stories sounded as if they were out of fairy tales, with strange foods and customs, exciting towns and ports and places unknown. "It must be a hard life. It must be a hard life," murmured the rat, not really believing his own words. "Well, what do you think?" asked the sea rat with a weary smile and a wink. "That reminds me," said the polite water rat, noting the time. "Would you stay and take lunch with me? My riverbank home is close by." "Now I call that kind of you," said the sea rat, "and I shall accept your offer. But couldn't you fetch it along out here? I can't stop for long. I've got that ship to catch, you know." In no time, the water rat had fetched the lunch basket, and the two animals began to eat. The sea rat continued stories of his travels. Spellbound and quivering with excitement, the water rat followed the adventurer mile by mile, over stormy bays, through crowded boathouses, across harbor barriers, over a racing tide. Oh, sorry. There we go. Sorry, kids. Okay. Sorry about that. Finally, the sea rat rose to his feet. He was still speaking and still holding the water rat's attention with his sea gray eyes. "Thank you for your lunch," he said softly. "I take to the road again until at last I reach the sea town I know so well. And you will come too, young brother. The days pass and never return, and the South still waits for you. Take the adventure. Heed the call. Before the moment is gone, 'tis but a banging of the door behind you, a carefree step forward, and you are out of the cold life and into the new. You're out of the old life and into the new. Then someday long from now, jog home here if you want, when the play has been played, and sit down by your quiet river with your goodly memories for company. You can easily catch up with me on the road, for you are young and I am aging and I go slowly. I will linger and look back. At last I will surely see you coming, eager and light-hearted, with all the South in your face. The old sea rat's voice died away into the silence. The water rat sat in a daze. He saw at last but a distant speck on the white surface of the road. As if in a trance, he rose and repacked the lunch basket. He returned home. And gathered up a few special treasures he was fond of and put them in a bag. He moved about the room like a sleepwalker. He swung the bag over his shoulder on a stout walking stick for his journey. Then slowly but steadily he stepped out into the bank just as the mole appeared. "Where are you off to, Ratty?" asked the mole. "Going south with the rest of them," murmured the rat. The mole, now much alarmed, stepped in front of the water rat, dragged him aside, and placed him in a chair. The rat mumbled of strange and wild adventures, then sank into a deep slumber. The mole left him for a time and busied himself with household matters. It was getting dark when he returned to the parlor. He found the rat where he had left him, wide awake indeed, but limp and silent. The mole could see that rat's strange fit had passed. Rat was now sane again, though he seemed weak and shaken. So the mole began to talk of other matters. He talked about the important matters of home. He talked about the harvest moon rising that very night over bare acres dotted with green bundles. Little by little, the rat began to sit up and to join in about the harvest and apples and jams and jellies and their snug home life. The mole placed a pencil and a few half sheets of paper on the table at his friend's elbow. "It's quite a long time since you did any poetry," Mole remarked. The rat pushed the paper away from him, but the understanding Mole left him alone with the paper. When Mole peeped in again sometime later, the rat was scribbling away, pausing at times to chew the top of the pencil in deep thought. It was joy to the mole to know that the cure had at last begun. Chapter 10. The Further Adventures of Toad. The front door of the hollow tree faced east. Sitting up, Toad rubbed his eyes, first and his toes next. Then he remembered everything: his grand escape, the followers, his leap from the train, and best of all, his freedom. He had the world to himself that early summer morning. Toad, however, was something that knew clearly which way to go to get back to Toad Hall. He found a road, and the road then found a canal. Toad followed both the water. Soon, Toad noticed a pleasant swirl of quiet water. Then a barge pulled up by a horse, slid up alongside. The barge was a big, stout woman wearing a sunbonnet. "A nice morning, ma'am," she said to Toad. "I dare say it is, ma'am," responded Toad politely as he walked alongside. "A nice morning to anyone who is not in trouble. For me it is but sadness. My married daughter has sent for me, so I've left my washing business at home, where my other children are now alone, tearing the house apart like monkeys. And I've become lost and my money is gone. If I could only find my way. Where might your married daughter be living?" asked the barge woman. Close to a fine house called Toad Hall, replied Toad. Toad Hall? Asked the barge woman. This canal joins the river some miles farther on, a little above Toad Hall. You come along in the barge with me. She steered the barge close to the bank, and Toad stepped aboard. So you're in the washing business? Asked the barge woman. Finest business in the whole country, bragged Toad. Anyone who's important comes to me. They wouldn't go to anyone else if they were paid. Oh, I have 20 girls who work for me. I love it. Never so happy as when I've got both arms in this wash tub. What's a bit of luck? Said the barge woman. What do you mean? Asked Toad nervously. I never have time to wash my clothes, replied the barge woman. There's a heap of sweaty clothes on the cabin. You can start by washing my underclothes. Here. You let me steer, said Toad, now quite frightened. And then you can get on with your washing your own way. I might spoil your things or not do 'em as you like. I'm more used to gentlemen's things myself. Let you steer, replied the barge woman, laughing. It takes some practice to steer a barge properly. No, you shall do the washing you love to do. I'll stick to the steering that I understand. Excuse me. Toad fetched tub, soap, and some brushes from the cabin. He picked up a few grimy garments. He tried to remember how other people were. A long half-hour passed, and a burst of laughter made him look round. The barge woman was laughing wildly. I thought you must be humbug from the conceited way you talked, she gasped. I bet you've never washed a dish rag. You common barge woman, Toad shouted. I would have you to know that I am a toad, and I will not be laughed at by a barge woman. A horrid, nasty, crawly toad, she cried. Now that is a thing that I will not have. She grabbed Toad and threw him through the air. He landed in the water with a plop. Toad rose to the surface, spluttering, and saw the barge woman still laughing. He vowed as he coughed and choked to be even with her. He struck out for her, gathering his wet skirts over his arms. He ran after the barge as fast as his legs could carry him, thirsting for revenge. The barge woman was still laughing. Toad reached the horse, untied him, jumped on his back, and galloped away, leaving the barge to drift to the other side. The toad laughed a victor's laugh. He was a clever toad. Toad rode on, trying to forget how very long it was since he had eaten. Soon the canal was left far behind him. He had traveled some miles, his horse and he, when he came upon a gypsy wagon. Beside the wagon was a man sitting on a bucket. Over a fire hung an iron pot. Over a fire hung an iron pot. Out of the pot came smells, warm and rich, and he was such a hungry toad. The gypsy eyed him. Want to sell that horse of yours? Toad was not expecting this. He could turn the horse into cash. What? Said Toad. Me sell this beautiful young horse of mine? All the same, how much are you prepared to offer me for this horse? Shilling a leg. The man said briefly. A shilling a leg? Cried Toad. Why, that comes to only 4 shillings. 4 legs, for 4 legs. Oh no, I could not think of taking only 4 shillings. Well, said Gypsy, I'll make it 5. Then Toad sat and pondered deeply, for he was hungry and quite penniless, and he was still far away. How far he did not know, from home. And enemies might still be looking for him. Look here, Gypsy, you had me over 6 shillings and 6 pence, and you shall give me as much breakfast as I can possibly eat out of that iron pot of yours. And in return, I will sell to you my spirited young horse." The gypsy grumbled, but he counted out 6 shillings and 6 pence and gave Toad as much stew as he could possibly eat. With his pockets full of money and his tummy full of food, Toad tramped along merrily and thought about his wonderful luck. His pride and conceit began to swell within him. He got so puffed up with conceit that he made up a song in praise of himself and sang it at the top of his voice. The world has great the world has held great heroes, as history books have showed, but never a name to go down to fame compared with that of Toad. The clever men at Oxford know all that there is to be knowed, but they none of them know one half as much as intelligent Mr. Toad. The animals sat in the ark and cried. Their tears and torrents flowed. Who has it said there's land ahead, encouraging Mr. Toad? The army all saluted as they marched along the road. Was it the king or a kitchener? No, it was Mr. Toad. The queen and her ladies in waiting sat in the window and sewed. She cried, "Look, who's that handsome man?" They answered, "Mr. Toad." After walking miles of country lanes, he saw something coming down the road. Then he heard something that made his heart stop. "Toot, toot!" He stepped confidently into the road to stop the motor car, when suddenly he realized it was the very same car that he had stolen, and the people in it were the very same people he had stolen it from. In fear, Toad sank down in a shabby, miserable heap on the road. The motor car stopped just short of him. 2 gentlemen got out. One of them said, "Here is a poor old washerwoman. Perhaps she is overcome by the heat. Let's take her into the next town." They tenderly lifted Toad into the motor car and propped him up with soft cushions and went on their way. When Toad realized he had not been recognized, he slowly opened his eyes. "Now, keep quite still," said one of the gentlemen, "and don't try to talk." "I won't," said Toad. "I was only thinking that if I could sit in the front seat by the driver, I might feel better with the wind in my face." "Of course," they said. So they helped Toad into the front seat, and on they went again. Hold on, Scrappy. "I've been watching you carefully," said Toad. Toad said to the driver, "I wish you would kindly let me drive the car for a little." The driver laughed at this, but one of the gentlemen in the back said, "Let her have a try. She won't do any harm." Toad scrambled into the driver's seat and set the car in motion, slowly and carefully at first. "How well she drives," said the gentleman. Toad went a little faster, then faster, faster. "Be careful, washerwoman." "Washerwoman indeed," Toad shouted. "Ho, ho, I am the Toad, the motor car snatcher, Toad who always escapes. You are in the hands of the famous, the skillful, the fearless Toad." The men tried to grab the Toad. With a half turn of the wheel, the Toad sent the car crashing through a hedge into a horse pond. Toad flew through the air and landed with a thump in the soft, rich grass of a meadow. I'll read that again because my dog is interrupting me. I'm so sorry. Shh. Toad, thank you. Toad flew through the air and landed with a thump on the soft, rich grass of the meadow. He could just see the motor car sitting in the pond. He picked himself up and set off running across country as hard as he could. He giggled and laughed and sat down under a hedge. Toad again! Clever Toad! How clever I am! Then he sang out. The motor car went toot, toot, toot as it raced along the road. Who was it steered into a pond? Who was it steered it into a pond? Ingenious Mr. Toad. A slight noise behind him made him turn his head and look. About 2 fields off, 2 large country policemen were running toward him. Toad sprang to his feet and hurried away again. He glanced back and saw, to his dismay, that they were gaining on him. He could hear them close behind him now. He struggled on wildly, not watching where he was going. Suddenly, the earth gave way under his feet, and splash! He found himself in a fast-moving water that carried him along with a force he could not fight. He knew that in his blind panic he had run straight into the river. He rose to the surface and tried to grasp the reeds that grew along the water's edge, but the stream was so strong that it tore them out of his hands. Then down he went and came up breathless and spluttering. Presently he saw a big dark hole in the bank, and as the stream carried him past, he caught hold of the edge. He sighed, blew his nose, and stared before him into the dark hole. Some bright small thing shone and twinkled deep within the hole, and it was moving toward him. Slowly, a face grew around it. A familiar face, a brown face with whiskers, a round face with a twinkle in its eye, with the small, neat ears and thick, silky hair. It was the water rat. Chapter 11. The Fall of Toad Hall. The rat put out a paw, gripped Toad firmly by the scruff of the neck, and gave a great pull. "Oh, Ratty!" Toad cried when safe inside the rat's home. "I've been through such time since I saw you last. I tell you, Toad," said the water rat, "you go upstairs at once. Take off that dress, clean yourself up, put on some of my clothes, and try and calm down looking like a gentleman." Toad was about to be huffy with the rat. However, he caught sight of himself in the mirror over the hat stand. Seeing how badly he looked, he changed his mind and went quickly upstairs. By the time he came down, lunch was on the table. While they ate, Toad told Rat all his adventures. But the more Toad talked, the more grave and silent the rat became. When at last Toad had talked himself to a standstill, there was silence for a while. Then the rat said, "Now, Toady, don't you see what a fool you've been? Motor cars are just trouble for you. But I've had such fun. Awful fun, but I'm going to be a good Toad now. I've had enough of adventures, so I'll be off now for Toad Hall." "Do you mean to say you haven't heard?" "Heard what?" said Toad, turning rather pale. "About the Stouts and the Weasels. How they've taken Toad Hall," cried the rat. From the look on his face, Rat could tell that Toad had not heard. "After you went to prison," Rat went on, "Mole and Badger told everyone you'd be back. Somehow, some way, they stuck it out for you. They moved their things into Toad Hall and slept there and watched over the place to have it all ready for you when you turned up. Well, one dark night, Mole and Badger were sitting by the fire when a band of Weasels, Ferrets, and Stouts, armed to the teeth, rushed in upon them from every side. Those evil beasts bruised Badger and Mole with sticks and turned them out into the cold and wet. And the Wildwooders, who've been living in Toad Hall ever since, are telling everybody that they've come to stay for good. Oh, have they? Said Toad, seizing a stick. You'll only get into trouble, warned the rat. But the toad was off, and there was no holding him. When he got near his front gate, a long yellow ferret holding a gun popped up from behind the fence. Toad dropped flat into the road, and bang! A bullet whistled over Toad's head. Whoosh. The startled Toad scrambled to his feet and scampered off down the road as hard as he could. Still, Toad would not give in. He got out Ratty's boat and set off rowing up the river toward Toad Hall. All seemed very peaceful, deserted and quiet. He was just passing under the bridge when, crash! A great stone dropped up from above by two stouts, smashed through the bottom of the boat. What did I tell you? Said the rat when Toad returned. And now you've lost my boat and ruined the nice suit of clothes I lent you. Really, Toad, I wonder how you managed to keep any friends at all. The Toad saw at once how foolishly he had acted and gave a full apology. Then my advice to you is this, said the good-natured rat. Mole and Badger. Ah, of course, Mole and Badger, said Toad lightly. What's become of them? I had forgotten all about them. While you were living so recklessly, answered the rat, those devoted animals have been camping out in the open in every sort of weather, watching over your house. They've been planning how to get your property back for you. You don't deserve to have such true and loyal friends, Toad, really. It's true, sobbed Toad, shedding bitter tears. Let me go out and find them. Out into the cold, dark night and try... Hold on. Is supper ready? Come, Ratty, let's eat before it gets cold. They had just finished their meal, and Toad had fallen asleep and was snoring by the fire. When in walked Mr. Badger. Welcome home, Toad, he said. This is a poor homecoming. Almost immediately in walked Mole. Here's old Here's old Toad, cried Mole. Why, you must have managed to escape, you clever, intelligent Toad. The rat pulled Mole by the elbow, but it was too late. Clever? Oh, no, Toad said. I'm a stupid mug. I am. I'll tell you a few of my little adventures, Mole, and you shall judge for yourself. Toad, do be quiet, said the rat. And don't you egg him on, Mole, when you know what he is. But please tell us what's best to be done now that Toad is back. Things aren't good, replied the Mole. Guards posted everywhere, guns poked out at us, stones thrown at us, always an animal on the lookout. And when they see us, they do laugh. Toad, Badger fondly said, you bad, troublesome little animal. I would expect to see you more ashamed of yourself. What do you think your father, my old friend, would have said if he had been here these last months and had known of all your goings-on? Toad, who was on the sofa by this time, with his legs up, rolled over on his face, shaken by sobs of shame. Stop crying, said the Badger. Went on the Badger more kindly. What the Mole says about Toad Hall is quite true. It's useless to think of attacking the place. Then it's all over, sobbed the Toad. I shall enlist in the army and never see my home again. I haven't offered my last word yet, said the Badger. I'll tell you a great secret. Toad sat up slowly and dried his eyes. There is an underground passage, said the Badger, that leads from the riverbank quite near here, right up into the middle of Toad Hall. Oh, nonsense, said Toad. I know every inch of Toad Hall and inside and out, and I do assure you your father was a particular friend of mine, said the Badger sternly. He told me a great deal he wouldn't have dreamed of telling you. He showed it to me. He said it was already there when he purchased the house. Then if it's there, Toad said, a passage I've never seen, how's the passage of yours going to help us? There's going to be a big banquet tomorrow night for the Chief Weasel's birthday, continued the Badger. All the weasels will be gathered together in the dining hall, eating and drinking and laughing, suspecting nothing. No guns, no swords, no sticks, no weapons of any sort whatsoever. But the lookouts will be posted as usual, remarked the Rat. Exactly, said the Badger. That is my point. The weasels will completely trust their lookouts, the stouts, and that is where the passage comes in. That very useful tunnel leads right up under the pantry next to the dining hall. We shall creep out quietly into the pantry, cried Mole. With pistols and swords and sticks, shouted the Rat, and rush in upon them, said the Badger. And whack 'em, cried the Toad, joyfully running around the room. Very well then, said the Badger. Our plan is settled. It's getting late. Off to bed now. We'll discuss matters in the morning. When Toad came down for breakfast the next morning, he found that Mole had already slipped off. Badger sat in the armchair reading the paper. Rat was running around, busily sorting out weapons and 4 little heaps on the floor. The door opened and the Mole came tumbling into the room. I've been having such fun, he said with glee. I've been messing with the stouts. I hope you've been very careful, Mole, said the Rat anxiously. I should hope so too, said the Mole confidently. I got the idea when I went into the kitchen to make sure Toad's breakfast was being kept hot for him. I found that old washerwoman outfit, the dress, the bonnet, the shawl that he came home in yesterday. So I put them on and off I went to Toad Hall. The stouts were on the lookout. Good morning, gentlemen, says I very respectfully. Want any washing done today? They looked at me very proud and stiff and haughty. The sergeant in charge said to me, Now run away, my good woman, run away. Says I, it won't be me that will be running away. Let's back that up a bit. Now run away, my good woman. Run away, says I. It won't be me that'll be running away. Oh, Molly, how could you? Moaned the Rat. The Badger laid down his paper. The Mole went on. The sergeant said to them, Never mind her. She doesn't know what she's talking about. Oh, don't I? Said I. My daughter washes for Mr. Badger, and I know for a fact that 100 bloodthirsty badgers armed with rifles are going to attack Toad Hall this very night. 6 boatloads of rats with pistols and swords will come up the river and land in the garden. Meanwhile, a select group of toads, known as the Death of Glory Toads, will storm the orchard and carry everything before them. Were I you, I'd leave now. They were all as nervous and flustered could be. You spoiled everything, cried Toad. Mole, said the Badger quietly, you did very well. Good Mole, clever Mole. The Toad was simply wild with jealousy, more so because he had no idea what the Mole had done that was particularly clever. After lunch, Badger took a nap. Rat continued gathering weapons, and Mole put his arm through Toad's, led him out into the open air, shoved him into a wicker chair, and made him tell him all his adventures from beginning to end, which Toad was only too willing to do. Chapter 12. The return of Toad. Okay, let's see if we can make it. It's 40 minutes in. When it began to grow dark, the rat called them all back into the parlor. He stood each of them beside one of the little heaps of weapons. Then he dressed them for the coming battle. When all was ready, Badger took a lantern in one paw, grasped his great stick with the other, and said, "Now then, follow me. Mole first, Rat next, Toad last. Toady, don't chatter." The Badger led them along the river and then suddenly swung himself over the edge into a hole a little above the water. The Mole and the Rat followed. Toad, of course, managed to slip and fall into the water with a loud splash. The tunnel was cold, dark, damp, and low. Poor Toad began to shiver. The lantern was far ahead, and he could not help lagging behind in the darkness. The terror of being left behind seized him, and he ran forward with such a rush that he upset the rat into the mole, and the mole into the Badger. The Badger thought they were being attacked. He drew a pistol and almost shot Toad. Then suddenly they heard, sounding far up over their heads, a confused murmur of sound. The passage now began to slope upward. The sound of laughter and applause broke out, this time very close above them. "What a time those weasels are having," said the Badger. They hurried along till they found themselves under the trap door that led up into the pantry. The Badger said, "Now, all together." Hoisting each other up, they found themselves standing in the pantry with only a door between them and their unsuspecting enemies. "Our thanks to clever Toad," a weasel laughed. "Just let me at him," muttered Toad. The Badger drew himself up and shouted, "The hour has come!" and flung the door open wide. Battle has begun. What a squealing and a squeaking and a screeching filled the air. Weasels dived under the tables and sprang for the windows. Ferrets ran from the fireplace and jammed the chimney. Tables and chairs were upset, and glass and china crashed to the floor as the heroes strode into the room. There were only 4 in all, but the panic-stricken weasels, the hall seemed full of monstrous animals, whooping and waving enormous weapons. The battle was soon over as terrified weasels shrieked across the lawn. On the floor lay a dozen or so of the enemy who did not escape. The Mole was busily fitting handcuffs on them. "Mole," Badger said, "you're the best of fellows. Slip outside and check on the stout lookouts. I have an idea that thanks to you, we won't have much trouble from them tonight." Toad felt rather hurt that the Badger didn't say pleasant things to him as he had to the Mole, and tell him what a fine fellow he was, and how splendidly he had fought, for Toad was quite pleased with the way he himself had gone after the chief weasel and sent him flying across the table. Mole returned through the window, chuckling. Oops, there we go. "From what I can tell, though," he reported, "even the stouts threw down their rifles and fled. They've all disappeared by now." "Excellent animal," said the Badger. "Now, there's just one more thing. I want you to take those fellows on the floor there upstairs with you and have some bedrooms cleaned out. See that they sweep under the beds and put clean sheets and pillowcases on, and then put them out by the back door. I'm very pleased with you, Mole." The following morning, Toad had He came down to breakfast and found nothing to eat. This did not improve his temper. After all, it was his own house. Through the windows of the breakfast room, he could see the Mole and the Rat sitting on the lawn. The Badger, who was in an armchair, remarked rather shortly, "I'm sorry, Toad, but I'm afraid there's a heavy morning's work in front of you." We really ought to have a banquet at once to celebrate this affair. It's expected of you. In fact, it's the rule. If we have the banquet tonight, the invitation and write to all your excuse me. Now sit down at the table and write to all our friends. I'll lend a hand too. I'll order the banquet. What? Me write a lot of rotten letters? Be, why, of course, dear Badger. You wish it done, and it shall be done. The Badger looked at him with suspicion, then left the room. As soon as the door had closed, Toad hurried to the writing table. A fine idea had occurred to him while he was talking. He would write the invitations, and he would take care to mention the leading part he had taken in the fight. And he would include a program of entertainment for the evening, something like this as he sketched it out in his head. Speech by Toad. There will be other speeches by Toad later. Address by Toad. Our prison system, the waterways of England, horse stealing, on being an English squire. Song by Toad, composed by himself. Other compositions by Toad, sung in the evening by the composer. Can you see that? Here we go. Toad worked very hard on his letters. He got a weasel to help deliver them. And he had sent out all the invitations by noon. When the other animals came back, Badger and Rat caught Toad by the arm. Now look here, Toad, said the Rat. It's about this banquet. We know you too well. We want you to understand clearly once and for all that there are to be no speeches and no songs. Can't I sing them just one little song? Toad pleaded with sorrow in his eyes. No, not one little song, replied the Rat. You know well that your songs are all conceit and your speeches are all self-praise. It's for your own good, Toady. Toad at last raised his head. It was but a small thing, merely to hear the great applause that brings out my best qualities. And pressing his handkerchief to his face, he left the room. It's lucky we came upon that little weasel just as he was setting out with Toad's invitations, said the Rat. They were simply disgraceful. Fortunately, Mole has agreed to write out new invitation cards. Good, Mole, said Badger proudly. At last the hour for the banquet began to draw near. Toad had gone up to his bedroom to pout. After a while, he began giggling, however, shyly to himself. He got up, locked the door, and drew the curtains across the windows. Then he set up all the chairs in the room in front of him, like an audience, and began to sing loudly and with great gusto. Toad's last little song. Here we go. The Toad came home. There was panic in the parlor and howling in the hall. There was a crying in the cowshed and shrieking in the stall. When the Toad came home. When the Toad came home, there was a smashing in a window and a crashing on a door. There was a pestering of weasels that fainted on the floor. When Toad came home. Bang go the drums, the trumpeters are root-tooting, and the soldiers are saluting, and the cannon they are shooting, and their motor cars are tooting as the hero comes. Shout hooray, and let each one of the crowd try, and shout it very loud in honor of an animal of whom you're justly proud, for it's Toad's great day. sang it all over again. Then he heaved a deep sigh. A long, long, long sigh. And then he parted his hair in the middle, slicked it down, unlocked the door, and went quietly down the stairs to greet his guests. All the animals cheered when Toad entered. They crowded around to congratulate him and say nice things about his courage, his cleverness, and his fighting qualities. But Toad only smiled and murmured, "Oh, it was nothing. Oh, please, really, not at all." Oh, there we go. Archer came forward with a shout and threw his arm around Toad's neck. Toad only remarked gently, Badger was the mastermind. The mole and water rat bore the brunt of the fighting. I merely served in the ranks and did little or nothing. The animals were puzzled by his unexpected attitude of his. Toad rather liked this new kind of attention. He moved from one guest to the other, making his modest responses, and thus everyone now found him to be very interesting. The Badger had ordered only the best, and the banquet was a great success. There was much talking, laughter, and joking among the animals, but through it all, Toad only murmured polite comments to the animals on either side of him. He never once remarked on himself. Badger and Rat were in shock at Toad's mannerly behavior, and this gave Toad the greatest satisfaction of all. There were some knockings on the table and cries, "Toad! Speech! Speech from Toad! Song! Mr. Toad's song!" But Toad only shook his head gently, raised one paw, and smiled, asking his guests to eat and enjoy themselves. It was a banquet for them, not him. He was indeed an altered Toad. Oh, there we go. Sorry, guys. After this, the four animals led their lives in great joy, respect, and contentment. Toad selected a handsome gold chain and locket set with pearls that he nailed to the jailer's daughter with a letter of thanks. Even the Badger admitted that was a kind, thoughtful thing for Toad to do. Toad also wrote to properly thank the engine driver. He sent him some money for all his pains and trouble. Under severe pressure from Badger, Toad even found out where the barge woman was and sent her money for the horse he had stolen from her. A lawyer got all charges against Toad dropped in exchange for time already served in prison. And because Toad had truly become a more mannerly Toad, everyone had now been rewarded for his or her part. Sometimes, during long summer evenings, the friends would take a stroll together in the wild wood, now tamed. It was pleasing to see how nicely they were greeted by the animals who lived there. The mother weasels would bring their young ones to the doors of their dens and say, pointing, "Look, baby, there goes the great Mr. Toad, and that's the gallant water rat, a terrible fighter, walking alongside of him. And yonder comes the famous Mr. Mole. You've often heard your father tell of him." But when their children were irritable and quite beyond control, they would quiet them by telling how if they didn't hush, the terrible gray badger would come and get them. This was not true at all about the badger, for though he did not care much about society, he was rather fond of children. But the mother weasel's words never failed to have their full effect. The end. About the author, Kenneth Grahame. Kenneth Grahame was born in Edinburgh, Scotland, in 1859 His mother died when he was young, and his father left the children, who went to their grandmother. This sad beginning did have a happy result. Kenneth's grandmother lived in a lovely area near the Thames River and Windsor Forest. It was it was this beautiful, magical place that sparked the young boy's imagination and became a part of his future writings. Grahame went into banking, but he loved writing. His first novels, Dream Days, 1895, and The Golden Age, 1898, spoke of the romance of childhood and were very popular. Grahame married and had one son, Alastair, who was partially blind. In 1908, Grahame wrote the spirited yet dreamlike book, The Wind in the Willows, in part as a present to his son. The book was a success and continues to be loved by readers young and old to this day. In the last years, Grahame lived in a quaint town by the side of the Thames River, much like the animal friends in his beloved novel. He died in 1932. I really hope you enjoyed the reading. Thank you so much for staying with me this long. And please give a thumbs up for a like, thumbs down for a no, and a maybe with comments, and subscribe to get more. Again, this is Pearl Diane signing off, and I hope you enjoyed The Wind in the Willows. And I hope you learned a lesson within it, because there are some of us that are toads, some of us are badgers, some of us are moles, loyal, true, and through, and some of us are rats, water rats, sea rats, and mice, and weasels, and stouts, washerwomen, barge women, police officers, engineers. Whatever you do in your life, do it well, do it with love, and be kind to others. Good night.